Revelation 1162. From the 6th of November 1939. Materialists. Transience of earthly possessions. In earthly life, nothing is more of a hindrance to the ascent to the heights than the continued attempt to increase earthly goods. Man spends so much energy uselessly, which he should only devote to the one goal of increasing spiritual goods. The more he strives only for earthly wealth, the less he can concern himself with the further development of his soul, and the more distant is the thought of what will become of him after his death. He does not allow himself to be frightened by such brief thoughts and continues to turn his attention to earthly activity, tries to derive the greatest possible benefit from it, and thus remains in constant contact with matter, which he is supposed to overcome during his life on earth. This is all the more regrettable because he now also lacks the strength for spiritual striving, because his inclination for earthly possessions attracts all dishonest forces which support him, while the good spiritual power can gain less and less influence on him, and therefore the fight between good and evil power has to be waged extraordinarily persistently, and the will of man is first needed to fight for a final victory. And this will has to turn away from earthly desire, otherwise it is never possible to get the upper hand in the fight against evil. He who constantly has only his earthly advantage in mind, cannot possibly get in touch with the forces that have long since overcome all matter. Through this desire, he himself erects a barrier between himself and the spiritual forces that want to help him, and the human will must first become active to tear down these barriers. Only then will the good forces have access to him and be able to exert their influence. It is therefore extraordinarily difficult for the materialist to accept the spiritual commandments. He simply lacks any understanding for it, because only the force which is the most zealous opponent of that which is offered to man as the purest truth, has influence on him. This power will of course strengthen the will of rejection in man. He lacks knowledge, he does nothing of his own accord to remedy this lack, and therefore it will be unspeakably difficult to preach the gospel to a materialist. The words of God will only be empty sound, and his thoughts will soon digress again to his earthly affairs, which dominate him completely and are therefore the greatest obstacle to the further development of the soul. Therefore, man must first learn to recognize the nullity of everything earthly before he can begin his soul work successfully. The uselessness of his earthly life must be pointed out to him, he must be made aware of the transitoriness of that which fills his whole thinking, it must be made clear to him that in the end man cannot stop the ruin of the earthly, its decay, if it is divine will that it should fall prey to destruction. He will have to see all his possessions perish under his hands, in order to finally reflect on the values that endure and survive earthly death. Amen.